ʼunei, Cook.
So I've been working here for the university over 20 years. I think we're going on 22 years. And I started out as a student employee probably 24 years ago over in the Student Resource Center. And then the position for the Native Rural Student Center came open probably about 18 or 19 years ago. And I interviewed for the position and was really excited to have the position. And I just want to share just a little history about my interview process. ʼU'ai'ajstan was on the hiring committee, Marie Olson, and after they finished asking me all sorts of questions, the interview questions, then she started talking to me in the language and asking me questions in the language, and I was responding. My time, during that time, I was a student with Florence Shakely, and so I feel really lucky that I was taking classes at the right time and was able to respond to ʼU'ai'ajstan for this position. And I understand that there was, the other folks were really good candidates, but they had these big credentials behind their names. And it was because of my ability to respond in the language that I got the job. So when I first started, I learned that the Wuchine Club worked closely with our chancellor to advocate for the Native Rural Student Center for a space where they could practice their cultural values, share their traditional foods, and talk about some of their challenges as a Native student attending UAS. And that's how the Native Rural Student Center came about, and my position came with it. So I want to give credit and thanks to Wuchine for this beautiful Native Rural Student Center. So progress already, the university knew to listen to our students and worked with our students to create this space. And it started out small, but our groups, the different clubs that we work with out of the center and the events that we host here, they are always packed. And fortunately, our administrators love to attend our events. And so they could see how we would be crammed into small spaces. And so over time, this space grew to what it is today. And so my time, when I first started working as an employee for UAS, there were probably only 4 or 5 Native folks working at our campus. And I think Dr. Rosita Worrell was one of our anthropologists teaching. Florence Shakely was another faculty. And we had a weaving teacher, Janice Criswell. And those were the Native folks who were working. And then additionally, we had Patty Atkinson, who was one of the first coordinators here. And then she moved to another position for the state. And then Janice Jackson was the second Native Memorial Student Center coordinator, and then she and her husband, who were both employed here at the time, Richard was part of the facilities. They were here for some time, did some really beautiful work, and then they moved back home to Ketchikan. And in the meantime, it was when the PETUS grant hit our campus, that's when social justice terms started happening. We were learning how to talk about social justice because at the time it was, I think it was under Joe Nelson's leadership that we started talking about equity in that term and understanding unmet needs, because our students, we couldn't figure out, at the time there was a lot of us who didn't understand that the education system was set up in a way that didn't promote success. And so he would host luncheons, and then Jackie Tegaban was the next PETUS director, and she continued those luncheons for us to have these conversations. And then, of course, we have Ronalda here, who not only sponsored these conversations, but also lifted not only the PETA students, but students who frequent the Native Memorial Student Center. And we started working closely with First Alaskans to host Andor dialogues. And I think in my time here, watching us grow as a university and learning how to have conversations about systems and what change looks like. Obviously, it doesn't happen overnight. And I'm happy to say that even though my memory is a little fuzzy about how many Native people were actually working at our campus when I first started versus today, I've seen some really beautiful growth at our campus. We've had really wonderful chancellors who, through conversations, really good conversations with our Native faculty, staff, and students, I've witnessed some really beautiful growth on our campus. So thank you.
Jeez.
I've been at the university now, which kind of amazes me, for 11 years.
Oh my gosh.
And I stepped in just as an interim. There was a gap with the PETUS grant, and I had just retired from the Juneau School District. And in retrospect, my career with the Juneau School District was all about when systems don't work for Native students. So that included curriculum development and integration for a culturally responsive curriculum. It included direct services for students. It included management of students as an administrator, as a middle school vice principal, and then probably my richest time was as a principal of our alternative high school. That opportunity in and of itself spoke volumes of the lack of opportunity for students who are struggling. And typically the struggle comes from grief, a loss of family members, whether that's through divorce or death, the disruption of their lives. And we became and designed the space as a safe place and the landing space for students. When I left there 7 years later, I tallied up the students that we had served. We had served 1,500 students in that 7-year time, which rivaled the size of Juneau Douglas High School.
Wow.
And that says a lot in terms of our graduation rates. We were credit recovery. So I came from that space as well as K-12 programming and looking at ways that the system could do better. When I stepped in here, I mentioned it was for an interim. I thought maybe a month. And it turned out that through the interview process, I was asked to apply. And I did, and I remember in that interview process, everything here is done by committee, and Joe Nelson was leading the hiring committee. And I remember telling the group that, knowing that there were different viable candidates that applied, to say, if I'm not a fit, don't worry, feel good about your decision. And interestingly enough, later I heard that a couple of people on the committee interpreted that as I didn't want the position, which is very different than what I was saying. I wanted to find the right match. But what I was tasked with when I was hired was to bring the program, the PETA's Preparing Indigenous Teachers and Administrators for Alaska Schools statewide. It had always been a Southeast focus. And so it was full of challenges, but I would say one of the things that prompted me to apply for the position was that I really appreciated each and every person that I interacted with here. It was a positive experience, even though I stepped in after the semester already began. Everyone had their direction and their purpose, and I was always playing catch up. Who does what? How does the system work? And I'm reminded that Joe Nelson, when he recruited me for the position at an event that I was hosting for the school district, he said probably the biggest challenge will be learning this system. And we joke now that, boy, is that an understatement for the stratosphere that exists here. If you're staff versus if you're faculty versus if you're administration, and then the many layers of faculty that exist in higher education. At a point, it's really a pecking order, and I'm thankful that I was probably neutral in my mission, one that I knew already a lot by way of experience about K-12 education. And so I actually invited myself into the School of Education faculty meetings, and likewise I ended up inviting myself into the Native faculty group as well, because I'm not faculty, I'm staff. But I'm accustomed to that. Back when I was working with the middle school, I was hired after an individual who was, I'd say, a bit of a bully. He'd probably describe himself that way too. And I learned years into the job that there were a group of men who had a wager that I would fail. Mm. And so the gender thing, accustomed to as well. And to their credit, each of them individually came to me years later and apologized. They disclosed that had happened. They apologized for that, and they said, "You've done the opposite. You've excelled." And so I'm used to going where I'm not always welcome, but that's okay. And that was really what attracted me to UAS, and it's probably in part, I would say, because I landed here in the Native and Rural Student Center, and just in this space. I wouldn't want to be anywhere else, and I've told the chancellors, current and previous, that I wasn't interested in moving as I had opportunity for advancement within this system. Because I get to interact with students, get to know them in ways I wouldn't otherwise, since I'm not in the classroom, and then just have a pulse, if you will, on how things are going. The stresses of a semester as they increase on students, the supports that are needed or provided, but just that sense that we're here for people and putting people first. In terms of the vision for statewide, I'd say UAS and the School of Education with the dean at the time set a great standard to bring the program statewide, and it was really word of mouth within communities and Native communities that the program grew, and it became a little more rigorous to access the scholarships. You had to have junior standing. But there was also growth happening in the School of Education as well with programming options and personnel, how they shift and change over time. And so by attending the faculty meetings, I had a sense of the quality, and then from students, feedback on the quality. So over the years, hearing from students consistently that they feel that the programming that they were in, the degree program, it was rigorous, and that they felt that they could teach anywhere, take the skills and translate them into their home communities, which is ideal, and be able to provide a quality education for students, and being able to hear them articulate their vision for their own community and for their own students. And it's not unlike probably any of us that learning to what they had to overcome, to achieve their vision, opportunity, and seeing the value of education and the importance, and then how to open doors and keep that door open. So within the time frame that I've been here, I'm always reminded of a quote from an in-service training by a former principal, elementary school principal at the time. And it was a PowerPoint where the opening slide said, "The only people who like change are babies." And I'd say that's an understatement, that the more things change, the more they stay the same. And this is a large system. You have, of course, the hierarchy, you have the budgets, you have the way personnel are recruited and retained. It's interesting. And then program growth. And the program growth, I would say, only comes, and that's probably too extreme, but I would say it only comes from the vision of faculty. And that I wonder what it might be like to sort of unharness the sense of being held back for what kind of vision faculty would have. Because in the bottom line, if we're talking about student recruitment or retention, you rarely hear about student learning. Why come to be engaged with higher education? The learning that can occur here. And social justice is an example of that. Creating that, the learning that goes with inequity, conversations around equity, how the world works. Certainly pivots around money and leadership. There's so much that goes into it to begin to battle systems. And so there's always going to be resistance to anything for that reason of dirty diapers. They're not dirty enough. What prompts change? Necessity. So I guess I feel privileged, I guess, in that in the role that I'm in, I've been able to work very closely with faculty. I've been able to work closely with staff. I get to work with students, and so it's pretty darn ideal. What's ideal within the system, I'd say still remains the people, and then how can we make it better? People. How do we recruit and hold on to individuals? Part of that, I think, is employee satisfaction, but also it's what are we offering? And so we've seen the improved offerings as a result of partnerships with Native organizations, in particular the languages programming. And it's not that it hasn't been in place. It's like it's slowly building. And because I remember one of the earliest classes I took at UAS, because I'm from Juneau, but I left and went to colleges out of state. But I took a language class from Dr. Sokolov, and this would have been in the late 80s, I think. And then I was privileged to take courses with Nora and Richard Downhour, intensives. And they also had that vision for developing degree programs around the languages. And now where are we today, developing programming around languages and building the foundation that they created. So the opportunities, and interestingly enough, the first course that I took in college with Native faculty was at Stanford. It wasn't in Alaska, it was at Stanford. Dr. Bill Demmert, who was at that point, he had been the Dean of Education here at UAS. He then stepped into Commissioner of the Department of Education, and he was a visiting faculty at Stanford when I happened to be there. And I had worked with him over time in his tenure in Juneau, and I took a course from him. It was a lot of fun. It was a bit of a survey course with a lot of American Indian leaders in education that were guests in his class, but just keeping that, how sad I think that is that it happened away from here and not in the state. And that's probably one of the mountains that the university system has to climb to look at opportunities to increase for Native hire, the many fields that we're involved with. So there's a lot of work to do. Don't deny that. And it's going to be even tougher, I think, in the climate that we're in right now with recruitment of staff. And interestingly enough, as Alaska Native organizations are growing, they're facing some of the same challenges. So always work to do. Always work to do. Take away.
I think gonna cheese you on. And a you took the move. Ya kaya yeji ni. As to ya ark. A dato yeji to ninch. Ya at the screen key. Ya the cutway schoon ha ani cook. Kanahoy. Tekha aku kuaya. Ha ayik satia you did for archway you han. Ha hashuka ahas. I was thinking about this word as I was listening to you talk. Tutlawu. It's one of my new favorites, and it means to have fortitude, to have like strength of mind. And there's a related term, tutlawuj, which means to be stubborn. And so like there's this line between it, and I know we talk about some of this stuff as well. Like always trying to stay balanced so that you're doing the advocacy and you're doing the fighting, but you're not letting yourself become mean or become, because sometimes you got to fight these whole systems. I've been here for 11 years. So I came in 2011 and followed in the footsteps of Richard Dowenhauer. It was funny because I applied for the position. I think I was out qualified on paper. So there are two people who, it came down to three folks, and 2 out of 3 had PhDs in linguistics, and it was a language program. But also, I think there was something that was needed in terms of being connected to the community and transitioning to Indigenous programs led by Indigenous peoples, which is a difficult thing, I think, for a lot of universities to figure out, because they have these systems in place. But I think I recently got a PhD. I didn't have one when I was hired. And I think I was number 101 or something, 101st Alaska Native to ever get a PhD. So you can count them. There's so few. I was always trying to be 99, so I could get a Wayne Gretzky jersey and just wear it around, because he was number 99 in hockey. But I was really thankful for Joe Nelson and the advocacy that he did in my hiring committee, and also to Dan Monteith. And I remember when I was being interviewed, because it was me and 2 white men, right? And I was thinking, oh boy, I don't know if I can be picked over them, because it always tends to lean in their favor these days, at least those days. But I was just trying to be myself. And I was so thankful for to Fred White, who came and asked wonderful questions in Tlingit. We had wonderful conversations during the class demonstrations. And Ishmael Hope, when the students were asking questions, and he was really asking questions that were about connections. And I think it was really important. And then during the interview process, one of the first questions was, tell us about your experiences and connections to Alaska Native people and communities. And so I said, and organizations. I said, well, as an Alaska Native person, right? And so I was so happy I could answer that question like that, because as we sort of looked, as we had wonderful people doing wonderful things, but I think when I came here, you had like the Alaska Native cultural components and governance, you had Alaska Native languages, you had Alaska Native arts, and there were no Indigenous peoples at the lead of any of those things. And so I had a dream. I was living in Fairbanks, and I had this dream where I was standing with Richard Downhour in this office, and we looked out and there's this majestic view of these mountains. And he looked at me and he says, are you ready for this view? I said, yeah. And then I woke up. Then I got a call a couple hours later from the dean offering me the position. And I thought it was really neat. And I told the dean about it and got kind of a mouth. She's like, oh, okay. So then I was like, I'll call Richard Downhour. So I called Richard Downhour. I was like, I had this dream, looking out this window, these mountains, and I got the offer. And he said, are you ready for this view? And then I got the offer. And he said, I don't think you're going to get a window. You're too practical. I was like, talk about the metaphor. We don't need it. And I didn't get a window. I think I had Rosita World's old office when I first started. But at the first faculty meeting, I said, well, we're going to build a bachelor's degree. We're going to get our own Indigenous Studies Center, and we're going to be teaching all of our languages, and we're going to get our enrollment up, and we're going to, and I had these plans. And I think there was a moment of assumed camaraderie where one white male faculty member said to another, well, that's fine, as long as the corporations pay for all of it. Mm. But the one that they talked to was Dan Monteith, who's an incredible ally for us. He's Teahuidi. His name is Dani. And he says, well, who pays for math? Who's going to pay for English? Why do these programs not have to have someone who pays for it? And so we have paid for it. Mm-hmm. And so, but I continue to have those conversations to say this needs to be the responsibility of everybody. And so I'm really glad you brought up Bill Denmark, because he was so well respected in Hawaii, because when he had his role in the Department of Education, he really helped them build their schools, their language schools over there, and they never forget it. And then Dennis Denmark really was leading the way for building Indigenous studies programs, like moving things away from anthropology and getting all of our content under our own roof. And I'm also so thankful for the elders who would come to visit our classes, and for the ones who taught the classes before. My first classes at UAS were in 1996. And they weren't pleasant experiences. I was down at Ketchikan. I had a writing teacher who, he just habitually made fun of my work. He would just put it up on the board and make fun of it in front of everybody. And I just think about that. I was like, well, the other students probably don't know what you're doing, but I'm right here and I know what you're doing. And then I had a language class that it was challenging to try and figure out how to motivate a community to learn and to try and be active, because sometimes it just, there's a saying, I think it's maybe from Japan, like the nail that sticks up gets hammered down. And so whenever I try to do this work, I always try to talk to elders and figure out how should I approach these things and how should I talk to people, because you want to try and motivate everyone to start learning and start using our languages. But then you're also going to be taking the Band-Aids off of these wounds, and you're going to be trying to push these reconnections. And sometimes people have complex feelings about that, and then they'll take it out on you sometimes because you're there and you're encouraging them to do this stuff. But I think the thing that's been the most incredible for me is the students, and to watch people who learn our languages and who use them and who can communicate and see how it changes them, and they have these awakenings, and they might have an elder who comes to visit them. And then 5 years later, they watch the video and they can understand what they're saying. They might say, I didn't understand them then, but now I do. And I was there when this amazing thing happened. And so like the knowledge that exists within our languages is, there's some things that are very difficult. You could translate them, but it doesn't always have the same impact. You know, it's like if you took a cassette tape and you made a copy and a copy and a copy and a copy, and pretty soon it doesn't have that same sound and impact. And that's not to say that our languages aren't accessible, because we're trying to create pathways to just sort of get people here and to say, anybody, you could do this, you could do this. So as we've built a program, when I came here, Ernestine Hayes was here. She was so wonderful to work with. Sal Neely was here, and he's so fabulous to work with. Alberta Jones was here, and she was so incredible with the work that she was doing. And as we tried to figure out how to create more of an Indigenous presence in coordination with you folks, like it's been an uphill climb. It's an uphill climb all the time, with very little opportunities to take a break, because you gotta figure out the next thing, because you get something, but then you're like, okay, but now we got to get the next thing. And so as we built a bachelor's degree, and we're building a master's degree, and we're building out this Northwest Coast Arts program. But it's been challenging, because we're also advocating for our students when they encounter racism in the classroom, anti-Indigenous racism in the classroom. And we encounter it in various meetings. And so I do think the university has taken bold steps forward to sort of protect people and to be a safer place. And I think a lot of the work that we've been able to do here is because they set the foundation. They dug the hole for the posts, and they got us the wood. And then it's like they just said, put that post up. And so we put the house posts up, and then it was the students who they put the roof on things, because we would see them in their advocacy. And it was such a wonderful thing to see. It's like I always envisioned, as we built an Indigenous studies program, there would be something where there's nothing wrong with writing papers, but where they would be change makers, and that they would, by the time they graduated, they'd be able to look and say, oh, I made a difference. I changed this thing. And that's what we're trying to push folks out there, to go out there and to stay connected to their people and to their communities, to never think of themselves as above anyone because they have gotten an education, but to always be good listeners, as King Gisti used to always come and tell us, like a leader listens, and a leader always thinks of the people and works for the people. And so we try to sort of take those things. We have direct from the source video and audio for all these different speakers. And those are that's the walls of the house, is the words that these speakers have given us over the years. And we're so thankful to folks like ʼunei and Kathy Reddy, who would bring elders to our classroom and coordinate things, and to Nora Marks Dowenhauer, Richard Dowenhauer, Florence Shapley, Walter Sokolov for building this thing. And Vesta Dominics was doing this in Sitka, and Esther Shea was doing this in Ketchikan. And just to see, like, sometimes I think we're gonna make it. I think we're gonna do some amazing things. I wish that some of those folks were here to see it, but I know that they could still see it. I know that they're still with us, and I'm looking forward to what we're gonna keep doing.
So how do we get there? Gosh, you know, I really appreciate hearing what you both shared, and it reminds me of so while I was expressing gratitude to the university for like helping us grow this space, and you know, acknowledging PETUS and how PETUS has always lifted our programming so that we could get the information to the students on how to talk about unmet needs at our campus. And it's working. everything that you folks have contributed, everything that Joe Nelson and all the other names that you folks mentioned, going all the way back to our ancestors and before colonial times. It's, like you said, it's an uphill battle. So while I'm showing gratitude, I'm also saying that it wasn't easy to, number one, have conversations, because it shouldn't be the responsibility of our students, our faculty and staff who identify as Native, to help inform our institution, to help inform the flaws with the hiring practices. It's very uncomfortable, and it shouldn't be on us. That responsibility shouldn't rest on us. However, Ronalda, you were talking about outside investors, and the university has a ways to go on improving systems. And I want to acknowledge First Alaskans. They didn't have to, but they reached out to me. And for 12, 13 years, they have been bringing me into spaces to learn how to talk about these hard issues, about racism, but also talking about our painful history and colonizing and decolonizing and healing. And so for the Native Memorial Student Center, this space is, while I know what to do with the space, Janice Jackson before me knew what to do with the space, and our Patty Atkinson knew what to do with the space, and our students, the institution always had a question mark about how to grow my position, and how to grow the center, and always relied on me to grow myself. And that's a reflection, I think, on, we don't offer consistent professional development at our campus, and also awareness of culturally relevant training and understanding of history of people and place. And so First Alaskans has done such a beautiful job helping me by nurturing me with my education and my healing, and learning how to advocate in a way that allows me to still hold on to my identity and my truth, and be brave to talk about how some of the systems that are in place actually maybe aren't the best for our Native students. And anyway, so I wanted to acknowledge First Alaskans for reaching out and taking care of me, and the university, thank goodness, supported their efforts. So maybe they didn't know how to provide the kind of support and the growth that I needed, the access to the trainings that I needed, but First Alaskans stepped in, and they knew how to immerse me in conversations and dialogues. And then thank goodness that you accepted the position with PETA's, because your funding, you knew, even though you weren't part of First Alaskans training where they would whisk me off to Anchorage or Fairbanks for a training, when I would come back, it was through the PETA's programming, and you're signing off on my request to train our students how to have these conversations, how to speak up in a class when they experience something from a classmate, or from a comment, or from a discussion that maybe might have either marginalized or triggered our students. And so I can't do what I do by myself without the support and funding of folks who are not challenging me, but believing that what I'm offering is beneficial to our students. And because of that, not just the training and supporting my programming, but also You know, it hasn't been easy to do it by myself, learning how to talk and advocate. Sometimes I feel like you described what a faculty was doing to you in your class in Ketchikan, and that's, I think there's like this power dynamic between faculty and staff, and it doesn't matter how much truth I share if a person doesn't respect me because of the color of my skin, or if I'm not a faculty, you know. So I think I'm really thankful that the university has been growing in a way that makes room for all of us to have these hard conversations about what we do need at our campus, what our students need to be successful in their programs. And so in this particular case, it's not easy being Native on our campus. It wasn't when I first started, but it's definitely getting so much better with having folks like yourself and our beautiful students who bravely show up and commit. We just held an Andor dialogue through Wuching, and there were 16 folks there, and we had a really beautiful weekend with each other. And so we've been doing this ever since First Alaskans has introduced the Andor dialogue to our state. And the Andor dialogue is Alaska Native dialogue on racial equity. And because of that, we have we've come a long way. We still have a ways to go, but I did want to give a shout out to through these efforts and investments in programming and giving access to our students, we've had several powerful Native student leaders lead the change for our state, starting from our campus as student government leaders. The first one was the challenge of changing Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoplesʼ Day. That was through two of our Native students from our campus who started the conversation with Wuching, then student government, then faculty alliance, and it went on out of our region to statewide. It went to the elders and youth, and then it went to the Alaska Federation of Native, and then it reached the governor, and now through the ability of being able to talk about these hard conversations and truths, our students are leaders. They're powerhouses, and they are advocating for change. And so I wanted to acknowledge that. And the Wuching, when they started and they received the pole back in '92, there's a raven pole that stands on our campus that from the moment the invitation to our campus to accept this pole, our students said, we need balance on our campus visually. If we're going to receive this raven pole, then we know our responsibility as an institution is to advocate for an equal pole. And thank goodness we learned how to have these dialogues and these conversations about why is this problematic that there's only one pole on this campus that's not even related to the A'ka'quan, the people of this place, and how we can remedy that and bring the A'ka'quan into this conversation for the eagle pole that we have on our campus. And so that was also through Wuching and our student leadership and through the opportunities that have been funded through the PETUS program. And so we have made some really great strides. And then the final one that I wanted to talk about was the, you folks talked about growing our programs, the language program. And it was through Wuching. It was through a really collaborative effort through Wuching, through all of the language students, through all the PETA students, who were also probably some language students, some science students, all of these folks who were able to, through the Andor dialogue, through conversations here in the center with the faculty and staff who come and support Wuching. It was through these really hard conversations that we had about why isn't it making sense to the rest of our campus that we need a program for language. And then through your leadership, through your support, through other beautiful faculty and staff, and then our community organizations that lifted the lead from you, that we were able to get, and then the rest of the state, once the rest of the state learned about this push for acknowledging our native languages as the official language of the state, then the rest of the state got behind it. But it started with brave conversations at our campus saying, why is this English only? When we know the history of boarding schools and the damage that comes with it, and then the healing part that comes with it, the erasure that came out of the boarding school era, and all of the other colonial systems that are in place. So I've seen a lot of beautiful things happen in my time with the university, really beautiful changes that not only impacted our campus, but the rest of the state. And so, that those are really beautiful changes. And also, we still have a long ways to go. I'm only one person. I get pulled into a whole bunch of conversations when I should be here programming with my students. I get called on by the chancellor. I get called on, and they're really important calls, and I do need to answer the calls because they're really good questions about problem solving, cultural safety and equity for our campus. But I'm only one person, and I feel it when we get pulled into hiring committees, which are important. We need to have a presence on those committees, those opportunities to help not only represent our students and our community, but also to represent cultural safety and equity in that process of hiring. And so we're doing good work. We have a long ways to go. Ideally, my position, this center would have 2 or 3 more staff members to meet our students where they're at, because as we're starting to see in this time, through learning how to talk about our truths and our history, we're also realizing that there's this huge wound that needs to be healed. And I'm not trained to heal wounds like that, but I'm trained to listen. And as we're coming up on Orange Shirt Day, we're coming up on Indigenous Peoplesʼ Day, we're coming up on Native History Month, we're coming up to our ʼunei season where we're removing grief. It's a lot of beautiful things happening, and also our university has room to grow. And ideally, we would have 3 or 4 more trained staff here in the center to meet our students where they're at in their healing journey, where they're at in their navigating this colonial system. And I want to stress that I do appreciate that our students are showing up for these conversations. Our faculty and staff, we're starting to see more opportunities being hosted through the ʼKilt', through the wonderful talents of the library staff stepping up and stepping into a place where they don't have all the answers, but they're definitely creating time and space for all of us to show up who are ready for this conversation on how to make change. And so, that's all I have to say about that.
Thank you for that. What comes to my mind is the progress that has occurred has been in part, and well, maybe most importantly, a vision first and a purpose. And then secondly, the points around this being a system and a very complex system, that there are some key areas where the presence of and impact of Native people, bringing forward Native programming is evident. Within that structure of the university system, we have, I think, great opportunity if we carried the idea of vision further, whether it be one program like PETA's or degree programs, activities, that we've landed on something I think that is evident in the most recent Northwest Colleges accreditation process, that the commendations that the university received, I think, bear weight on credibility and what would it look like to continue to push and build on those opportunities, because it I think bears weight in the uniqueness and lending credibility to this institution that would not have happened with the individuals and with the purpose that is the drive behind programming and growth. That plays into infrastructure of the system, as well as the finances that make this world go around. And so the idea of building programming into general funds, in terms of budgets, growing those budgets, I think would come with vision and the idea of growth, that the work is never done. and certainly you touched on a lot of really key points related to that. But we have added to a really strong foundation. That holds true too with the School of Education CAPE accreditation, that the diversity and underserved students, that our data with PETA's carried weight in satisfying some of the criteria that's outlined in the education-specific accreditation. So there are those key points that we add immensely to this system, and what would it look like to really uniformly build on that weight with the individual strengths, adding the faculty voice, the staff voice, the coming together to support each other. As you mentioned, how you're one person, and I think we all feel that level of weight and demand and responsibility, and that speaks to the size of the of UAS, in that within our infrastructure, that's more often the case than not. You're one deep. And we saw that most recently with the University of Alaska system loss of personnel. The reason related to Alaska Native Success Initiative lead was that one of the points cited was that it was a lone role, and so welcome to our world. And what might it look like to build to truly team? Because while I personally hate group editing, but yet find myself in that setting more often than not, I do value group minds and how our separate and collective experiences around race could really help zero in on what priorities we choose to get behind. Certainly, I think there's evidence of growth in the last, in your case, 20 years, in our case, 10 years, important growth. And I think we're missing an opportunity, we meaning UAS in general, is missing an opportunity of really promoting what makes this place unique. And I'd say the uniqueness is the very specific programming that it's been able to capture that speaks to the Indigenous populations. I think that there's a lot more work to be done, and what might that look like? We're hearing more asks around curriculum, and that's personally a fun area to expand. And then how do we protect each other from not feeling that loneliness for opportunities for collaboration? And then it was mentioned too, the individuals who are desire to team and help advocate. those voices. That I don't think we've harnessed that unified voice as much as we could, with very specific defined vision and purpose and direction and priorities. And all of that, of course, takes great time, dedication. I would say the only meaningful professional development that I've experienced here was through Lumina Foundation, when we were invited through Witchy to really dive into questions around race in terms of what works for Indigenous populations. And what made that rich for me was that it sort of categorized ways of reviewing and self-assessing what it is that the institution is doing for areas of strength. And I had a nice taste of that, but we need more. And what would it look like to have a really sound professional development where diversity is truly honored? I was reflecting on this too with some of the broad scope planning that happens, whether it's student retention, as an example, most recently. And my reflection was, I mentioned having the opportunity to be at Stanford. And what struck me in hindsight was that diversity never appeared to be an issue. It was a given that this institution is diverse. And certainly we had students from all over the world. We had programming that served all over the world. You could be anywhere on campus and not feel that sense of being an add-on or invisible, or everyone had a voice. And that was a really rich experience that I didn't realize until, when you're trying to sort through and create a setting, a climate that's truly inclusive and accepting. And that struck me, though, that there were opportunities abound, working with Indigenous peoples. It was one of the first things I did stepping into, and it was a new experience, similar to the Native and Rural Student Center, that there was a student group that I joined right away, and had an opportunity to work with Indigenous people from all over the lower 48. But it wasn't until hindsight, as we're always grappling with the question of race, that never once did I feel that in that setting. It was a given that diversity is welcomed and honored. And that wouldn't that be a great vision for this space?
For this campus. Yes.
That's what I meant. Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Sorry.
For UAS. For the UA system.
Yes.
That it's not an add-on. It's not a opportunistic kind of space, but it's truly modeling the welcoming environment. And how different would that be? So, and I would say that the strength is that Alaska is strong, I would not have learned as much as I've had opportunity to learn of our Yupik and Inupiaq populations if it weren't for the students that were attracted to UAS and interacting and learning some of the nuances of difference. It's been really rich. So what would it look like to really land on that idea that this is a welcoming space as a vision, and what would that vision play out in action, and how might we get there? Opportunities for collaboration, an expectation of change. And I think we're sort of on the cusp of some of that, but I also see faltering. And if there are naysayers, my thought is, what do you fear? It's not to internalize it that it's me that I have to change. It's what do you fear? Put it on the table. For status quo or race or gender, what have you.
Mhm.
So, and let's talk about the fear rather than the push away or the attack or the personal attacks or the distance.
Mm.
So there's always work to do. And that said, the climate that exists in our world today has been challenged dramatically.
Mhm.
And if we stay true with that vision and that purpose and that sense of identity and belonging, ideally you belong anywhere.
Mhm.
It doesn't matter. Certainly we've had that experience, the only native in a classroom. You have a voice, but that you make it yours and you belong.
Mhm.
And that question, what do you fear if you're getting resistance?
Mm.
So there's, maybe that's idealistic, but maybe visionary too, that what we do, I've certainly seen growth, but I always know that there's more to be done. And then more importantly, I think for any professional development planning, there's always changeover in personnel. So you're never done with it. It's always, it will evolve. But what would we like it to look like?
Mhm.
So, thanks for inspiring some thoughts. I know there's more. There's always more, right?
Mhm.
Kay dihina wacha Aantooxu.aat de Ronalda Cadiente Brown. Ya Aantooxu.aat Ronalda Cadiente Brown. There's an elder in Carcross, his name is Kolene Norman James. And he said in Tlingit, I said it in English, and I said it in Tlingit too. He said, our ancestors used to be able to see way out into the future because they're always thinking about the space they're going to reserve for their grandchildren. I was working with Kakashat, Florence Sheikley the other day. They said, I've been asked a few times how you say you belong here. And she said, Iya'ak. So there's this word Ya'ak, which is really neat in Tlingit. I think it's related to weaving barks. And so in my mind, I think like someone's weaving a cedar bark mat for you to sit on and getting a spot ready for you. And so it really means like a spot has been reserved for you. And I always think about that for our students because for me, I guess the future that I'm trying to envision in my work here is that a student can come here and feel like they belong. And they feel like, oh yeah, there's a spot for me. And they can be themselves and they can not worry about being looked at or treated differently or in a negative way because of who they are. And so we've heard students say, I got a choice. I can either be myself or succeed. And that's how education sort of creates these failure points for Native peoples. And so it's been wonderful to be a part of something that's different and to say, yeah, we can actually have something that's way different than that. And then it's always an interesting experience to try and navigate that throughout all the other things that they're going to go through. Because they don't just take they don't just take my class, they take other classes as well. Some of the things I think that have been really inspiring is seeing folks like Alaska Heritage Institute reach out and go and pursue big grants to say, well, what if we could do away with the tuition part for languages? What if people could just learn for free if they want to learn? And we were able to do that. And I got to give a lot of credit to the administration because it was probably 5 years ago. I said, give me a number. Just give me a number and let's get rid of how much this stuff costs. Let's just get rid of the costs. These languages are in trouble and we need to just take the doors off of the classrooms. And I think it was hard to sort of envision how to do that because higher education is usually about like, how do you break even? And usually the answer is to get money from people who want to learn or to get money from organizations. And so to try and find a different model has been really exciting. And now we have, I was thinking about the numbers. I always think about the numbers. I do think there's about 100 people who could speak Tlingit at some kind of level. And then, but if you said, okay, well, what if we just switched to Tlingit and that's the only language we spoke, who could kind of fully communicate their thoughts and opinions and feelings and predictions? It probably gets down to about 20 people. And so I get nervous about stuff. And I always think like, are we going to make it? And are we going to be okay? But then if I look into a room and I see like, there might be 200-300 people learning our languages right now through our campus. We're not the only way, but we're finding this way to create access and to just encourage them to keep going. And then I think of the first time I went to Kahaka'u'aat Ronalda, the College of Hawaiian Language at the University of Hawaii at Hilo. And I just saw how much it was an indigenous space and how I just felt so comfortable there, even before I went there as a student. And I remember thinking like, that's what I want to be here. Then I saw their Hawaiian medium school and I said, and I want to be here. And so it became a goal of mine to replicate those through our own culture, through our own processes, and to have those in our spaces. And now we have a language nest and we have these programs that are just continuing to grow strength, like the TCLL program. And we have partners like Gold Belt Heritage Foundation and Douglas Indian Association and Tlingit and Haida and Sitka Tribe of Alaska, and others who are just continually stepping forward, the Ketchikan Indian community. And as we build these partnerships, I want all of that to continue to strengthen. And then I want every single person who works for the university to have a base level of knowledge about Indigenous people. So like a training program as people are onboarded, you got to know some basics. You got to know a few words. You got to be comfortable saying these words. You got to know some information about land claims and histories, so that as they encounter Indigenous students who are becoming, like we're about 1 out of every 4 students now. So then the other thing that we want to see is that we're 1 out of 4 faculty members, 1 out of 4 staff members, 1 out of 4 administrators. And if we can just sort of get to that, then we've reached diversity, which is always about, for me, diversity is always about the numbers. What's the numbers look like? And then when we talk about equity, the equity is different. And equity is, for me, is the absence of disparity. So is everybody having about the same rates of failure and success whenever you sort of look at these various systems? So the biggest thing for me is retention. Like, how do we hold on to the students? Like, we know they're going to get lonely. We know some of them are coming from different parts of Alaska that are so different than our homelands, but we want them to feel safe. We want them to feel like it's still their home. Like, this is also your home. And so I think as we sort of continue to work on retention and work on retaining our staff and faculty as well, it seems like we start training people up and getting them into certain positions, and then they leave. And maybe they're leaving for a different job, but a lot of times they're leaving because it's kind of a rough experience. But I think to see administrators who continue to be open-minded about the changes we're pushing for, I feel really good about it, because I feel like we're all getting into the icy waters when we're telling people like, okay, get in the water, and then they get in up to their ankles, like, okay, I did it. And we're like, no, get into the water. And so with every change we make, and I think we're making substantial changes, I think the other thing too is a lot of the administration aren't Indigenous. And so we have to keep encouraging them, take another step, take another step, take another step. And that in the waters is strength, and in the waters is our ancestors, and in the waters is a sense of equity that we can have that we haven't experienced yet. So to sort of look at this thing and say, we have a pretty strong sense of equity, and that things are leaning in this direction of giving everyone a really good shot at succeeding on their own terms, with more kindness, with more love, with more openness, so that we can just spend more time laughing and visiting and getting out on the land and doing stuff and not having to feel like it's always a battle. And so we were talking about this in our classes the other day, this term ʼunei, how it really comes from like, everybody's hurrying too much. And then and then it leads to war and it leads to suffering. And if we can just sort of remove the suffering component from education and have it become something that's a lot more like sitting with your aunties and sitting with your uncles and being in a home where you feel safe and provided for. And I'm so thankful that the NRSC exists and that it is a home for all of our students. And that takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of coupling with things that we might, if we make it too much like ourselves, then we're being exclusive to Alaska Natives who are from other parts of Alaska. And so we got to figure out, we're always trying to figure those things out. We're always flexible and trying to sort of incorporate those things and trying to deal with, there are some white people on this campus who will always feel like you're excluding them. Even like you say, hey, you should come over. Like, I don't feel included. Like, I just said, come over, But it's also, there's a lot of conversations to be had about these healing processes that occur between all of us, between our peoples, those of us who are from our communities and those who are from other communities. And how do we sort of become more comfortable with each other, overcome the times when it gets a little bit tough, and then sort of always keep our mind on the students and just maximizing their chances for success and for building upon whatever they want to do. And so I'm thankful to do this work. I'm thankful that I think the future's bright. I think the NRSC is going to be a big old Indigenous Studies Center here on campus. It's going to be a space that we call our own. That's a whole building that we can have our classes in there. We can have studios in there, and we can have a safe space for all students. Because sometimes people say, well, I don't know about segregation, but it's not about segregation. It's about Indigenous students need to be able to see themselves in spaces. And some of those spaces need to be Indigenous spaces. Mm-hmm. And it's going to be just fine. It's going to be okay. And we're thankful for folks who support us and those who fight us. We're thankful when they leave, because this is our land, this is our place, and we will do what we have to make sure it's safe for the students who come here, who are our relatives, and those who learn about us and become shingit chasusit achoe hayuch tangi at chasauchlich ye'awach tuyik adeawe haskutziti hain achoaya hausachani ai.